Good evening. I declare this meeting of the Port Phillip City Council open, and I welcome the members of the public that are here tonight. The City of Port Phillip respectfully acknowledges the Yalukit Willem clan of the Boomwurrung. We pay our respects to their elders, both past and present, and we acknowledge and uphold their continuing relationship to this land. Council has a local law that determines how this meeting will be conducted. There's a time allotted in tonight's agenda for public question time. During public question time, members of the public can ask specific questions on general matters other than those that are relating to a topic that's on the agenda for tonight. Members of the public are only to ask a specific question and shall not provide any statements or contextual comments relating to that question. Consequently, the official minutes of the meeting will only record the question asked and any response given. The number of questions that a member of the public may ask shall be at the discretion of the chairperson. There's also an opportunity for members of the public to ask a question or make a comment on a specific item on tonight's agenda. This will be done prior to the Council considering the item. We encourage questions or comments from the public that are directed through the Mayor, are not defamatory, abusive or objectionable in language or substance, rather are presented in a spirit of mutual respect for the Council and the community. We ask all speakers to abide by the directions of the Chair. If you wish to ask a question or speak to a report, please complete the blue form that's available at the table just outside the chamber and hand it to a staff member. I encourage you to try and limit your questions and comments to around 3 minutes and to avoid repeating any points that have already been made by other speakers. Please note that all council meetings are now being live streamed. Live streaming and recording allows the community to watch and listen to meetings in real time, providing greater access to council decision-making and debate and improving openness and transparency. The live stream of this meeting is available on Council's website, and the recording of this meeting will also be available to view on Council's website in about 48 hours' time. The cameras will film and record councillors at this meeting. However, care is taken not to film or record images of members of the public. If a member of the public asks a question or makes a comment about an agenda item, they'll not be filmed, but their voice will be heard in the live stream and recorded. Please also note, in accordance with Council's local law, that this meeting cannot be audio or videotaped unless permission is granted by the Mayor. Councillors, we'll go to the agenda now. First up, we've got apologies. Councillors, do we have any apologies? Councillor Gross.
Councillor Bond is an apology tonight, Mayor Voss, on behalf of Councillor Gross.
Thank you, Councillor Pearl.
It's working.
Now, so we have no other apologies, and I'll put that to Councillor Bond as an apology. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. We'll move to item 2, the minutes of the previous meeting. Councillors, the minutes of the ordinary meeting held on the 4th of October have been circulated. Are there any questions regarding these minutes? There are none. If not, can I have a motion? Councillor Simic to move. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Baxter to second. I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Item 3, which is declarations of conflict of interest. Does any councillor have a conflict in any matters that we're discussing tonight? I note there are none. Item 4, petition and joint letters. Councillors, we have no petitions tonight. Sealing schedule, and we don't have any documents requiring sealing. Public question time. Councillors, we've got 2 people that have requested to ask questions tonight. I think everyone's out sunning themselves outside. And I'm going to take them all in the order that they've been received. I'd like to call on Mr Geoffrey Love, please. Welcome, Mr Love. You could take a seat and press the button. There's a bit of a funny thing going on with the microphones, but you might have to press it a couple of times.
I'm a
Some things work the first time.
A skilled professional.
Have you got something to hand out, Mr. Love?
Firstly, yes, I have a two-page handout here. There's 9 copies, one for each councillor, which will assist in the comprehension, digestion and illustration.
Mr. Love, if you could take a seat, because the people at home,
yes.
all those hundreds, can't hear you.
Jeffrey Love, St Kilda. Now, I haven't got my copy. Okay, there are 5 questions for Council. They relate to matters that have been raised generally, and the point of these questions is to drill down, to use the common parlance, and get some specific plans and targets for some of these flood-related matters. First question, will Council, I've written them down so that councillors have time to read them, it's because there's of the number of them, and we would be hoping, or I would be hoping for some questions from councillors later in the agenda, rather than just responses from officers. Firstly, will Council create a target and plan for reducing hard surfaces across the municipality? We've addressed this issue many times, but we'd like to see something concrete, or not concrete preferably. Permeable concrete perhaps. Secondly, will Council create a target and plan for increasing open space in flood-prone areas? Thirdly, and for this I refer you to the attached pamphlet, will Council approach Bayside Council and Melbourne Water to implement the original plans for a flood-retarding basin in Elstonwick Park South? This urgently needed measure was never completed, and as you can see from the document, there's an invitation to a sausage sizzle from Melbourne Water, a plan that was developed in conjunction with the City of Port Phillip and Bayside, and it was about flood retardation in Elstonwick Park, not just the north but also the south. And part of the plan, the corner where the lake is, has never been implemented. That remains high ground, and the proposal was that that ground be lowered and to act as a flood retardation in the event of the floods that we keep having. I'm not sure about the sausage sizzle. But anyway, yes, I also draw your attention to the fact that this is the 20th anniversary of this, these proposed works that were never completed. Again, action is what we are requiring, and clearly actions announced but never undertaken after 20 years is a pretty poor reflection. Fourthly, what is Council's response to adopting a developer's drainage contribution plan as operated by Bayside Council? And fifthly, this needs a little amending, but is Council aware of funding available under Melbourne Water's Living Links program? It's actually the Catchment Management Authority and Melbourne Water, I think, that provide the funding for that. Will Council join the Living Links program and consider funding for the Elwood Canal Estuary project? I have here a list of, I think it's about 8 projects that have been funded by that program. Mostly the City of Kingston has been benefiting from this funding, but there's also Bayside Council, and it would be available for the City of Port Phillip to get some money to do some much needed works on the canal, starting with the estuary. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Love. Before I hand over to Mr. Walters, and Mr. Walters might want to come up, Councillor Gross, you had a question you wanted to specifically ask Mr. Love, was it?
Mr. Love, I'm just having difficulty disentangling this conceptual drawing to understand what hasn't been built and what has been built.
Please turn your microphone back on.
Sorry. Thank you. The corner bounded by New Street and Head Street, those ovals there, the two football grounds and the rugby pitch they remain high ground. They were to be lowered to act as a flood retardation basin in the event of a flood.
Thank you for that clarity.
In the maps, the maps show that the edge of the catchment actually doesn't include the Elsternwick Park South, but in reality the floodwaters don't respect that map. There are different versions of the maps. In fact, it does get engulfed or engaged in Elster Creek floods.
Thank you, Mr Love. Mr Walters, you have got those 5 questions.
I have, thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you. Regarding the opportunities to create targets and plans for hard surfaces and open space, we're at a time where we're working away at some new strategy development, and the sustainability strategy is currently kicking off, which is an opportunity to provide this input into that strategy, so that may well be an outcome of that. But in the meantime, with respect to hard surfaces, I'm talking about hard surfaces there, with respect to hard surfaces, we are currently working through the renewal and upgrade projects to identify opportunities to reduce hard surfaces where the subsurface drainage is amenable to such interventions. We obviously need to be very mindful of where water goes, as well as it sitting on the surface. So that's question 1. Regarding the open space matter, we've commenced the development of the new public space strategy, and that will be a public process, and that will occur over the remainder of this year and into next year. Question 3 was around approaching other bodies with respect to the matter just discussed, the retarding basin in Elsternwick Park South, and I think the community knows that we are collaborating with the 4 catchment councils in the Elster Creek catchment through the CEO Forum, and the CEO Forum is indeed an appropriate place to raise the ongoing matter that Mr Love discussed with respect to flood retarding basin, because it is an opportunity. I'll step over the question 4 because that's for Ms O'Neill, but the Living Links program, we are aware of the Living Links program. It's run by the Port Phillip and Westport Catchment Management Authority. It's an environmental and social project including councils and community groups with the aim to improve the connectedness of parks and reserves, open spaces, coasts, beaches, pathways and the like, and it's got an objective to seek a world-class urban ecosystem. Port Phillip foreshore is actually noted as one of the 17 interconnected corridors and of opportunity, but Elster Creek is not on their list of 17, but that doesn't mean it's precluded from anything. It's just the foreshore is noted, and most of the projects are foreshore projects. Bayside Council is on the committee who assesses the projects, and anyone can actually, amongst many others, and anyone can actually propose a project, and there may be opportunities there to take that up, but community groups can also pursue projects under that program. And
thank you. And Ms McNeil for number 4.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the question around adopting a developer's drainage contribution plan, such as Bayside, that is something that Council could contemplate, but prior to contemplating that, we know we need better data and a more informed 10-year or long-term asset management plan for all of our flood management assets, and that is what we're working on at the moment. So we're working on much better data on the condition of all of our assets, and that will inform an expansion, upgrade, renewal program that is much better detailed. And that is something that then could be used for contemplation of something such as has been put together for Bayside.
Thank you very much. I'd like to now call on Mr. Isaac Herman, please. Welcome, Mr. Herman. Oh, I see you've got some maps there. Okay.
Thank you. Isaac Herman from Elwood. Madam Mayor, CEO, councillors, council officers. Just want you to have a look at these two maps. One's an SES map that they didn't want replicated, so I've just laminated it, and so it sort of bears testimony to the number of emergency call-outs over the recent floods. It's quite a serious document, and you can see the density of flood emergency calls out specifically around St Kilda Street opposite Elstonwick Park. In contrast to that, we have the Bayside C153 amendment map, which doesn't show any flooding at all in St Kilda Street.
Mr. Herman, are you asking a question?
Sure.
Thank you.
So my question is really, where's this council's response to the C153 Bayside amendment, which I thought the council had indicated that it would be putting a submission to the planning panel about it. This is, I think, incredibly pertinent, because the better zoning we have, the better awareness residents will have, the better sense of preparedness we'll have, and the less emergencies we'll have. So that's basically the gist of it. But you'll notice also on that map, and I question how this all came about, that we've all accepted Bayside's map, because it shows that A, there is no flooding mark there on that corner that I've indicated in Elwood. B, there is no marking for the flood retarding basin in Elstonwick Park, which is an actual requirement of the state planning policy framework, and it's not there; it's absent. The other thing that's happened recently is that signage at the corner of Glen Huntly Road and St Kilda Street, flood safety signage, has been removed. By whether it's Vic Roads or whether it's Bayside, something that's happened very recently, and it's signage that was there for decades and decades. I remember it from my childhood. Recently it got updated, and then a couple of weeks later, totally vanished. Okay, so I'd really want to know what's council intending to do. Thank
about
you.
that signage.
Well, not only about that signage, but about the whole.
Understand, Mr.
Submission.
Walters, are you able to take that on? And thank you.
Through you, Madam Mayor. I have received some advice regarding C153. Council does have the opportunity to present at a public hearing in early December. I've been advised that the scope of the matter is fairly limited in terms of addressing or making recommendations to broader Elwood or Elster Creek flooding and management issues, and that the SBO is a standardised approach to ensure that future buildings are designed to mitigate flood risks. So a submission that we make it is sort of constrained somewhat by what's being considered by the panel. However, it's still under consideration. We still have time, certainly, to prepare a submission to that forum.
Okay, thank you.
And regarding the signage, I'll take that on notice and we can report that to maintenance or find out about it.
Take the signage on notice. Okay,
Yep.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Herman. So that's the end of the public question time. We'll move to councillor question time. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? Councillor Baxter?
Sorry, Mr. Walters, you might need to come back. So my question is just in regards to the submission C153 that Mr. Herman was talking about. So yes, there is time for us to make a submission there. What would we need to do to go ahead and do that?
I don't have the documentation in front of me, sorry, Councillor Baxter, but we need to notify our intention to submit by the 10th of November. There's a process that's been set out by Delwip, I think.
Thank you, Mr Walters. A follow-up, Councillor Baxter.
I do have a follow-up, just to address one of the other questions that were asked by Mr Love about a target and a plan for reducing hard services across the municipality. Now, we've had some conversations about this and how some areas are quite difficult in terms of the subsoil that's underneath, and you know how if you make everything permeable it can cause problems, sinkholes and that sort of stuff. Is it, in your opinion, and knowing that this is a tricky sort of issue, in your opinion, is it possible to get to a point where we could set a citywide target, or would it have to be really localised in terms of permeability?
Through you, Madam Mayor. I think it's pretty difficult to speculate on that at this point in time, and not being a geotechnical engineer, I'd probably be stepping outside my professional boundaries. But we need to do some analysis of, and I understand we're doing some core samples and similar things to determine what the subsoil condition is, and it could lead to that. So we're at early stages.
Thank you, Mr Walters. Any other councillors have questions of the officers? Councillor Copsey.
I have a query through residents regarding the reinstatement of the Rotary Children's Playground and how that is progressing and what the delay in that process is.
Do you want to state exactly where that is, people who don't know?
It is on Jacka Boulevard next to the Stoke House.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the Rotary Club playground was removed to allow the Stoke House to rebuild after the fire. It is a requirement in their lease that they reinstate the playground. They are late in that reinstatement, and we are working strongly with them to get that put in place.
Councillor Copsey, follow up.
And I just wanted to confirm, are you aware of the residents who've contacted Council in relation to this, and can you undertake to provide them with an update soon?
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, we are in contact with the Rotary Club, and we'll also follow up on any other residents individually.
Thank you. Any other councillor questions? Thank you. We'll move on then to item 8, which is the presentation of reports. We'll move to item 8.1 first, which is the South Melbourne Market Annual Report 2016 and 2017. We don't have any members of the public that have requested to speak to this report. Normally we would have the chair of the Market Committee present this report, but as I am the chair, I'd like to call upon our Market Manager, please, to come and just give a few brief words and present the report, please. You can sit wherever you like. Mr Williamson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you for the opportunity. This has been an auspicious year for the market because it's been our 150th birthday this year, and it was a highlight. We generated an enormous amount of publicity, something like $1.5 million worth of publicity from the projects that we did this year. But the one that we are probably most proud of, and I'd like to recognise the staff for, was when we started to look at the 150th, we realised there was almost no photographs, about 24 photographs that we could find of the market, and almost no stories, just a dearth of stories. And so the staff decided to start an initiative called My Market Story, and through that we just got some fantastic stories. And if I can just name two, things that will be there forever. As the stallholders tell me, I'll be gone, but what we have left is an amazing legacy for the market. We came across a man called Vane Lindsay, who is 94. He's been visiting the market since he was 7 years old, and we were able to capture his story, which was a fantastic story. A man by the name of Paul Millett, who was a fashion icon in the 50s, women's swimwear, the first sort of bikinis. We actually managed to find a garment from the 1950s through eBay. But his story was a fantastic one to talk about what Council was doing for refugees. They escaped the war and escaped going to to concentration camps, and talks about council making them feel really welcome and giving them stalls. And it's great to see that legacy, that the council still does those great things and has a great social heart. And so those are two of the stories. We then did an exhibition, and we've got poems and stories, and recognised the stallholders who've been the forgotten people in this. So I think that was one of the things that we've achieved that I'm proudest of. We've also done some fantastic things in sustainability, and we're leading the way in markets. We've 430 tonnes of our green waste went to a worm farm last year. That's a 98% reduction in green waste that would otherwise go to landfill. We're now getting that product back to sell, and hopefully make that a commercial venture. If it isn't a commercial venture, we've taken 98% of the waste away from landfill. We discovered a dehydrating machine that will do all the rest of our organic waste. It turns all our organic waste, our food waste, fish, coffee grounds, etc., meat and bones, into compost, into a compostable material, like a blood and bone material, within 10 hours. And so we're now getting 8.2 tonnes of organic waste each week going into that, reducing our waste to landfill by 95%. So they're probably the two biggest highlights from the year, the 150th and what we're doing in sustainability, and both will be legacies for the future. So that's it in a nutshell. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Williamson. Councillors, do you have any questions? Councillor Simic? And I know Councillor Simic is on the committee along with me, and Councillor Bond.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the market mix policy. It's something that the market has worked on with storeholders over the last year and help set the direction for the market going forward. I think it'll be interesting to, maybe if you've got a few moments, to outline some of the work that we've been able to do there.
So, thank you, Councillor Smith, through you, Madam Mayor. So, one of the things that I noticed is when we first came into the market was there's been a lot of change, and it seemed to be a lot of gut feel change, and a lot of it was correct. Cecil Street has become one of the great hubs of the market, and famous for was something that, if you look back, didn't seem to be based on research. And through our committee, we're starting to make some changes too, and we realised that we needed to get a research base as to what's happening in the world of markets. So some of that was what's happening in the world, what our customers are saying about the market. So we've introduced 6 monthly reviews of our customers to say what they think of our offer and what they think we're doing. And so the market mix policy was developed out of that research that said, although we were a fantastic local market, we had a much older, our users were older than the demographic that we represent, and a bit like golf clubs where I came from, we were getting a lot of older customers, but we weren't replacing them with the new base, and so we needed to tap into that market. So the market mix, we also realised that throughout the world, food is the number one thing. So the move to food, the move to local, the move to authentic market experience is what people wanted to see. And so the market mix reflects all that, Councillor Simic and everyone else. It sort of reflects, we've got data to support the decisions we make, research to show what's happening overseas, and some of those things, keeping affordability is in there. So all the things that are in our strategic plan about sustainability, local, affordability, are all captured in that. And so last year, for example, we brought in a Gap patisserie, which has been a phenomenally successful niche market, but a high-end, high-cost patisserie. And we realised that food, we needed something cheaper and good value. And so the Burek shop, I can say now, is probably the cheapest, freshest food that anyone can get in Australia. When you can get your lunch for $3 and you can get a salad, you can get a tabbouleh for $3, and a 5-bean salad for $5 is extraordinarily good value, made fresh every night. And so we've been conscious in everything we do to get value for money and to also tap into this local need. Is that enough? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gross.
I would like to say congratulations on hitting 5 million. Is it 5 million?
5 million, correct.
Just over the 5 million mark, but it's a nice round number. I just wanted to ask a few questions about the financials.
Yes.
If I may. So the contract payments were increased this year, and I just wanted to ask about them and that impact on the diminished cash surplus for this year.
So contract payments includes all our maintenance too, Councillor Gross. So this year we upgraded the SOMI space in there, and those elements go into the contract payment. So it's not strictly contracts in the sense that the security and the cleaning and the pest control are all clear prices, $1 million in our cleaning each year. So that is a variance. We had a number of compliance issues that we addressed this year. We had a compliance review, and we insisted on doing those as we found them. And we also had two events in the 150th that get focus in there. So buying equipment to close down the streets to make sure that in the night market and for the night market and the Mussel Festival, starting to have our own stuff and our own equipment rather than hiring it out. So, you know, one event and you've paid it back. So there was a lot of that expenditure this year. So it's not that contracts have gone up; it's that the maintenance and the 150th anniversary were key costs that went into that budgetary item.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions, councillors? If not, we have an officer's recommendation. Councillor Simic, you would like to move that. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Gross to second. Councillor Simic, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you, and thank you once again for presentation and also the presentation of the annual report. It has been a real pleasure working with the Section 86 committee as a committee member, along with Councillor Voss and Councillor Bond and others in that committee over the last year. I really enjoy each time we get together and really delve into what the market's doing well, what some of the opportunities for improvement are, and the contact we have with storeholders directly and the community that really enjoys the market. 5 million visitors over the 16-17 year, introduction of 10 new stalls, continue to lead the way in environmental initiatives, some of the ones you've outlined already, the 400 cubic metres of green waste, being taken to a worm farm, the installation of Guy recycling machine, which is just incredible and something that everybody should take time to go and have a look. It's one of the really something quite unique in Victoria, and something that other markets have already come to have a look at, other producers are coming to look at, something that we should be very, very proud of. Also, the polyester boxes being compacted into by the poly compactor, which is incredible. The water that we're able to collect through rainwater. Some of the celebrations that the market runs throughout the year, the 150th celebration, some of the stories you've talked about. And again, yesterday we met two people who grew up together in the market, fell in love, and are married now, operating businesses within the market. So it's well and truly correct to say that the market's important for our community, important for all of the people that work there, your excellent management and all of the staff, and probably something that people don't realise, how few staff actually manage the entire market. A huge operation. It is something for this council to be incredibly proud of. So congratulations on a very successful year. Very proud to move this motion, and I'm sure I join you with all of the other councillors in congratulating for all of the incredible work.
Thank you, Councillor Simic. Councillor Gross.
Other than to thank the councillors and other people who've served on the committee, I have nothing to add.
Would anyone else like to speak to the report? Councillor Baxter.
Look, I'll be very brief and just say that it all looks fantastic, and all of the stuff that's happening around waste is really, really exciting, and I'm a big fan of the Mussel Festival.
Councillor Crawford.
The little thing I wanted to add is I didn't realise that extended the story collecting, and I love hearing that the stories will be, collected and be at the heart of the market as well, captured forever, and I think that just adds a whole other element. So thank you for that project.
Would anyone else like to speak? Then I'll also speak, and I want to say, you know, a hearty congratulations to you and your team for all the things that you do down there. It's truly a wonderful experience just walking through the market and just, you know, feeling and seeing all the wonderful things that have gone on down there. There has been a lot of change, and with that has come a lot of challenges as well, and we're certainly not out of the woods there. We've got a lot of things that we need to do over the next few years in terms of complying with, you know, DDA restrictions and things like that. There's been some beautiful new stores. They've brought in many more people. The demographic that you've been trying to look for are coming in their droves, but it's been a lot of hard work, and I think it's paying off. The report that's been delivered tonight is a beautiful report, and it's actually a delight to read it. It's visually very beautiful, so well done on that. I love the fact that the market is focusing on local, authentic, and, you know, the market mix is increasing the food side of things. I look forward to all the new things that are going to be coming in the future. I also know that one of the sustainability initiatives that we're looking forward to in the next year that this council's been working quite hard on is the plastic bag free, and we're looking at implementing that in the new year. And along with complementing those heritage stories, there's been murals placed upon the market walls, which you know, have created a lot of context and feeling around that history. So I'd like for you to pass on to your team, you know, how much we appreciate the hard work that you all do. Thank you. Councillor Simic, would you like to close? Councillor Pearl, you may talk.
Thanks. Thanks for the report, and just wholeheartedly endorse the comments. What a wonderful asset this is, and how lucky we are, obviously, to have it. And indeed, it's probably the glue that holds that part of the municipality's community together in many respects. A transition to a more defined corporate governance model is obviously the next step in potentially the transition to support the future growth of the market. And one of the things that obviously concerns me, the only thing that really concerns me about the financial reports is obviously there's a 73% decline in the cash surplus to just under $200,000, which is quite small, and that governance model obviously going forward should ensure that financial controls are put in place to ensure that the wonderful asset we have there doesn't obviously become a liability as the projects going forward add up in the cost base. But congratulations, and I understand you're transitioning to a new role, and your passion and enthusiasm I can see in briefings and on the street when I'm in the market with you is an inspiration to us all, and a wonderful example for your team and your staff to follow. And a lot of the success contained in the report is due to your wonderful work and the team that you've led. Well done.
Councillor Simic, another opportunity to close? No? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. We'll move to item 8.2, which is the community engagement on setting the direction for the integrated transport strategy. And councillors, we don't have anyone that's requested to speak on this item. Councillors, do you have any questions for the officers? I do.
I'll ask a question. I'll ask one.
Oh, you can go first then, Councillor Gross.
I just wanted to ask the officers, if I was, if I had a specific interest in an area of transport, I'm thinking of, say, Elwood and the buses, how would I go about reading about what we're likely to do? Where would it be, or is it too broad brush at this stage to give specific advice to the community?
Ms. Lee, Mr. Bartels.
Through you, Madam Mayor. I'll make sure I get this down a little. Through you, Madam Mayor. This is a position paper, and so taking on board your question, Councillor Gross, it is the start of the conversation with the community. It's not a draft strategy by any measure, but it really does lay out the why and obviously the problem that the city is facing in terms of growth and how that translates into trips and demand for car parking. And a little bit of the what in terms of what we seek to achieve, which is outlined through the objectives proposed within the position paper. The next step drawing on the feedback provided by the community, is to develop a draft strategy, and that is where we get into the how, which picks up on some of those things I think that you mentioned there, in particular about location specific, but also the various needs in that location as well, with the reference to the Elwood and buses.
Thank you, Councillor Gross. Anybody else got any questions? Councillor Pearl.
Thanks very much. Under objectives, smart parking management. Just a quick questions on items 1 and 4, and understanding this is a working document and obviously it's going out to consultation. So item 1 is progressive decrease in on-street car parking. Number 4 is selectively develop council-owned car parks. After consultation and the final report's been written, will council be able to quantify what the decrease in on-street parking will be and what areas will be affected in a general way or a specific way? And for 4, do we have specific projects to develop council-owned car parks?
Through you, Madam Mayor. Sorry, excuse me. I'll take them in order, I think, in terms of objective number 1 and a smart parking management first. So the intention at this stage is that through the development of the strategy, we will be seeking to quantify what the change in the number of on-street car parking spaces will be based on the implementation or the realisation of the other objectives within what will be the draft strategy. As to what level we can go into, it depends on how much detail we're able to put into the projects themselves or the strategies that will be implemented to realise the various objectives. But the intention is that we progress that as far as we can to quantify that in a real way. We have already done work in terms of through the evidence building phase of developing the strategy to map and complete an inventory of both council controlled on-street as well as council controlled off-street car parking, and we'll be using that as a basis of moving forward to then see what those changes are working through the development of the strategy. In respect to the second part of the question, in respect to objective 4 about selectively redeveloping car parks, we intend to test this with the community through this consultation phase, specifically about understanding and prioritising how we might use that or redevelop those spaces off-street, and that will help to guide us and inform us in terms of shaping the strategy, knowing that council has probably a limited number of off-street car parking spaces themselves, but at least a guide to how we redevelop that in the future based on some of those local needs, which I think Councillor Gross touched on earlier, that we can develop that through the draft strategy.
Councillor Simic.
I'm looking at the projections in particular. It's quite a worrying picture with projected car travel. Some of our streets are really at a deadlock. 2 questions. One is, are there any concerns with the projections or that we should be aware of that you've come up with? And then second of all, I understand this is a discussion paper. In moving forward, will any other projections be looked at to supply community with more information about what we know the future is likely to look like in order to be able to make really good decisions about best integrated solution for the City of Port Phillip?
Through you, Madam Mayor. In terms of understanding those projections, they are based on modelling and by their very nature are projections themselves, so they represent the continuation of business as usual. There is an opportunity to influence those, but we have used, or our consultants have used, a model that is used across Victoria and has been developed and managed by the Department of Transport. So there is a level of credibility behind that in terms of those projections, scary as they are. In terms of the second part of your question, and in conjunction with the community consultation, we will also be seeking to engage with our stakeholders, particularly those within government agencies, and that gives us the opportunity to gather their intel or information and to test some of the facts that we've worked through, or the modelling that we've completed in the formulation of our position paper, and then we can bring that forth into what will be the draft integrated transport strategy to ensure that it is as robust as possible.
And if I might, through you, Madam Mayor, add another element. The projections are, as John said, based on some good traffic modelling, but also based on growth projections for the population. And I think it's a fairly robust indicator that if people continue to undertake their travel movements in the ways that we currently do, then the conclusion that congestion will be significantly worsened in that period is a very sound conclusion.
I have a question as well. I'm wanting to understand what will the residents see, what will our community see and be able to respond to with this ITS?
Through you, Madam Mayor, do you mean in respect to the consultation on the position paper and strategy, or do you mean in terms of the artefact that is a strategy? Sorry, I don't mean to...
So we're going out to ask them some questions. What are they going to see and how are they going to be able to respond to those questions? I note this document is really dense. You know, it's not digestible and the average person probably won't pick it up and read it. So how are we going to get as much participation if it's, you know, several pages long? What is it that they're going to see that's going to make them go, I want to participate in that?
Through you, Madam Mayor. We have quite a complex and broad community consultation program proposed. A component of that is an animated video that will be getting launched on the 30th of October, which simplifies that message in as great as, well, as I guess, universally accessible as possible. And the idea for that is to try and bring people into that conversation. We will also have a survey that asks very detailed questions that we've designed to respond to the kind of topics that the community has already identified with us that they're concerned with. And that's a level of detail that sits alongside the position paper and will contribute to that next phase. Topics including things around our current parking system, as well as elements of the public transport network, and that it gives the opportunity for people in different neighbourhoods to be able to identify issues that are more important to them, relevant to their neighbourhood, both within their local street as well as in their key destinations and shopping strips. So we're trying to ascertain a level of prioritisation around use and function that is meaningful to the individual in as simple a way as possible.
I agree it needs to be simple. So can I put that back to you how I heard you in terms of this next step? You've got a video that's going to go out in social media, etc. That's going to entice people to get onto Have Your Say website. There will be potentially a series of questions there that they either have to register or not to be able to participate in. That's the extent of the next stage, is that correct?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'll go through the proposed consultation in more detail. What you just described is accurate as a component of what we're proposing to do. But on top of the Have Your Say site, which will host the animated video, and the video will also be made available through our social media campaign, the survey will be a link through the website. We'll also have hard copies available at our libraries, town halls and upon request. The Have Your Say site will include background information and links to other key pages on our website, so where our policies sit and other core information around topics that are important to the community that we know through conversations we've had already. We'll also be conducting 4 focus groups. One will be with local businesses specifically, and 3 will be for representatives of each ward. We'll also be doing targeted consultation with other harder-to-reach groups across the municipality, which includes some of the committees that we already have, schools, and other kind of representative groups we can access through existing formal mechanisms. As my colleague mentioned, we'll also be doing external consultation with state government representatives and peak bodies. And we will also have the upcoming issue of diversity. We'll have a number of articles about transport and place-related topics, as well as a specific insert which will summarise some of the core information that's in the position paper as well. And that will go to every household in the municipality.
A further question. So those questions on Have Your Say website, just so I can get a bit of an idea, because none of this is in the paper, but we're endorsing the consultation in item 1 of the recommendation. Will I be able to go on there and see a question or be able to comment on potentially the percentage of ratio for apartments, for car parking?
Through you, Madam Mayor, we don't have a question specifically in relation to planning scheme controls because part of what we've identified as the scope of the ITS at this stage of the development is not looking at that component. We're looking more specifically in terms of parking at on-street parking supply and controls and off-street parking supply and controls.
So is there anything else that's out of scope in relation to parking?
Private supply of parking, through you, Madam Mayor, is essentially the core out of scope for the ITS in terms of the direct influence that the strategy will have. We will identify in the strategy the relationship between what the planning scheme provisions do in terms of the overall parking management system. And so the position paper that we developed earlier in the year will be an additional component available to the community to be able to read that unpacked a lot of that relationship in addition to the position paper. So we will be able to provide some more detail for some of those consultancies that we developed that sit behind the position paper, including a review of the ratios, without representing a recommendation of what we're proposing to do, but unpacking the analysis that we've done to date.
Through you, Madam Mayor, just to add to what Ms Abernathy has outlined, in respect to the Have Your Say page, we will be currently investigating the opportunity to provide opportunity for a general feedback to be provided by the community, in addition to the survey questions, to elicit some of those ideas as well that we can use and input into the next stage of the strategy development.
Thank you, Mr Bartels. Councillor Gross, was there any more questions? Councillor Gross to move. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Simic. Councillor Gross, would you like to speak?
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, I think that on this rather beautiful, sleepy, sunny afternoon, we are on the threshold of making a really important decision for this council. It used to be said that there are 3 important issues in the city of Port Phillip, and that's parking, parking and parking, and nothing has changed in the decade that followed that. I just want to very quickly say that a couple of things about this. First of all, this is one of the 4 transformational issues upon which we want this council to be judged. We want to make significant change in this area, and if we fail, it'll be a big mark against us, and if we succeed, and it's a complicated area to succeed in, we will be seen as really serving our community well. There are 4 stages to this, and this is the second stage, which is setting the direction, let's go out to the community and find out what they want. But it is underpinned by a wealth of work, and I just want to mention that some of the studies that underpin this. We've completed a paid parking policy recommendation. We've had a Fisherman's Bend paid parking report, which has been completed. Trip generation, mode split and parking rates research, which has been completed. This is all in the report, but this is informed by a wealth of research by independent third parties, which really adds a rigour that's vital to this. Because we have done this before and it got somewhere, but it did generate more heat than light because parking, transport is such a vexed issue. And finally, I just want to go over some of the really upsetting things that came out of the research. At the moment, only 23% of the trips in Port Phillip are made by, in a sustainable way by public transport, walking or cycling. It's got to be improved, and as I say, a lot of the people involved in that decision are state government instrumentalities that we have to persuade, and that's often not easy. So we're not taking enough sustainable trips. Secondly, 17% of Port Phillip land is used for road space. That's a scary figure in so many ways. I mean, private transport is liberating, car transport gets us from A to B, we need to provide roads, but it's a lot of space. And then 20% of that road space is used just to store cars, and in addition to that we've got all of our garages, used or unused, and private parking. So a lot of expense and space, which is incredibly precious in Melbourne, is devoted to just storing cars. So the system is broken. Congestion, carbon, there are so many issues that hang off the transport decision. And also, we can see the interaction between transport decisions and planning decisions, which we'll make tonight and every night we sit in this chamber. So I just want to really congratulate the officers. I think it's a vast project trying to get your head around what can we do to move forward, and I think the Mayor made a really good point about how accessible is this, and it's pretty tough stuff to read. I know I'm congenitally lazy, and so it's tougher for me, but yeah, I completely understand where you're coming from with that question. So, congratulations, a lot of work's been done, a lot of scary data's been unearthed, and I look forward to seeing if we can elicit from the community consensus and wisdom in the way we go forward.
Thank you, Councillor Gross. Councillor Simic.
Well said, Councillor. We are really at an important point. The projections into the future are quite scary. We are inner city Melbourne, our population is growing, and one of the scary trends over time has been that in many parts car dependence has grown, but we know that we really needed to focus on other modes of transport, and Council has tried to do that as much as possible. But one of the things we realised over time is that we've got to have a holistic approach to transport. So this is one of the transformational changes that we talked about in our council plan. One of the things that as councillors we came together and said we really want to get this right into the future. So I'm incredibly proud of this piece of work. There's a lot of constituents who've contacted and said, what are you doing about more bicycle paths? What are you doing about parking? And it's been convenient in many ways to say, well, we're working on an integrated transport strategy. But the reality is that we've got to do this work, and we've got to do it as well as possible So I know there will be iterations as we move forward. There will be probably things that we'll recognise and realise as we're doing the community consultation. There might be some changes that we need to make in the way that we consult with the community. But ultimately, this is one of the biggest problems that we face. And it's important for us to work with our community, for them to understand the problem as well, and to help us come up with solutions. It's going to take quite a long time. The future is uncertain. But one of the things that we do know is that we've got to be moving towards active transport and looking at infrastructure improvements. Whatever happens, we know that we can't do this alone. We have to work with the state and federal governments to do this right. But when we have a framework, which I'm sure is what will come out of the integrated transport strategy, we've got a much better opportunity to go to the state and federal government and say that this is what's needed and what's required. So I really look forward to engaging deeply in this work, and I really hope that we find every possible way to get the community to come along with us on this one. Look forward to see where we end up. So congratulations and well done.
Thank you, Councillor Simic. Councillor Baxter.
Yeah, look, I reckon this is really exciting, and basically, for all the reasons that have been said by the two previous speakers, we know that for the health benefits, for productivity benefits, for the benefits to our climate and our planet, we've got to get people out of cars and onto bikes, get people walking, get people into public transport, trains, trams and buses and so on and so forth. And I'm really, really excited at the prospect of once you get people out of all those cars, you pull all those cars off the road, that we have all this space that is no longer taken up by cars anymore, that we can then reallocate to some better use. And, I live in Balaclava, space, there's a premium on that, and people need open space, they need to be able to get places on foot. The more that we can reallocate that for the use of people instead of cars, the more we can really just, we can make this place even more awesome than it already is.
Councillor Crawford.
So the decisions we're going to have to make around this are the ones that keep me awake at night, because, as we've mentioned, parking is the primary concern, parking and planning. When we were flooding in December in Elwood last year, Councillor Gross and myself went down to film some of the flooding, and we were knee-deep in water on one of the streets, and Councillor Gross introduced me to someone, and he said, I'd really like to discuss something with you, and there were cars half underwater and properties about to get flooded, and he said to me, I really don't want to pay for another parking permit outside my house. And I thought, that's where it sits on the list of priorities for people in the city. And we do live in a very dense city, and it's a fantastic city, and it currently has amenity. But in order to maintain that amenity, our great environment, and obviously none of us want to travel around in gridlock, we are going to have to make some really tough decisions as a council, and this is where I would like to encourage everybody, and tell your friends and your neighbours, I'm sure they're going to have an opinion around some of these issues, to contribute along the process to this integrated transport strategy. We need your insight, your ideas, so that we can make some of the tough decisions, because this is a big long-termer. It's going to be a lot of pain initially for us as a council, but long term it is going to be the right thing to do. So it does worry me, but I do encourage everyone to participate in this process so we can have the best possible outcomes for the future of our city.
Thank you, Councillor Crawford. Anyone else like to speak? Councillor Pearl.
We're blessed to live in a municipality that is extraordinarily well serviced by pretty much every mode of public transport, and there's already a train line, and there's another train line coming, which is good news, and the tram and bus network, which we're extremely lucky to have. The only thing I would say going forward, we have to be transparent and frank with people about what we're actually proposing in our plans. So if we're proposing to remove on-street parking or change the way we issue parking permits, we need to be open and frank with people over a long period of time so people can adjust and give us frank consultation instead of pleasantries around the vibe of the problem, or the complaining about the problem than actually determining the appropriate solution for everybody in our community. redevelopment of council land is probably the second most controversial thing, and we all remember what happened last time we tried to fix a council car park on the St Kilda foreshore and how well that turned out 10 years ago. So again, if we're going to change council car parks, off-street parking, we need to ensure that we're open and frank about what we're doing and what we're actually proposing over a long period of time.
Any other Councillor Copsey?
You can see how much councillors have already grappled with this issue and how intense our interest in it is. And I think I'm just really glad to be starting this process. We really do welcome the community's input to help us address this, which is one of the biggest challenges, true, but it also is a space where things are changing so rapidly, and there is the potential for us to secure real gains, actually, if we make the right decisions in amenity, health and well-being. You know, we have one of the most beautiful municipalities in Australia, I think, and I think that we do need to grapple with the way that we value the small space that we have here in Port Phillip, one of the smallest municipalities as well in Victoria. So there are challenges, but I will also say that it's one of the most beautiful places to ride. We should be making it one of the safest, most well-connected for other people to get on their bikes, particularly the young, vulnerable, elderly. We shouldn't have barriers to people getting out and about and enjoying this beautiful place that we live, and especially on Ride to Work Day. I think it's a fantastic day to be endorsing our the start of our consultation. There's been so many changes. The streets in Port Phillip, you know, God willing, won't be the same in 10 years because we have some really discomforting elements of life in the inner city at the moment with the contest for space. So help us solve that problem. If you're interested in transport and you want to see how we're going to grapple with changes that are coming our way, like electric vehicles, like fleet services, and shared mobility. We've just had the MOU signed this week with O-Bikes, which is a fantastic move to help us set ground rules to get the most of that technology. And things are going to keep changing rapidly in this space. So please come with us and help us make the best of the changes that we need to make. Thanks very much to the officers for all the work getting this to this point.
Thank you, Councillor Copsey. Anybody else wishing to speak? I'll just quickly welcome this step. This has been a long time coming, so we've been eagerly awaiting, you know, getting something that the community can actually sink their teeth in. It's really evident that a business as usual is not the way forward anymore. We have to change. But we want to know from our community, what is the change? What is it that's going to work going forward for, you know, the next 20 years, whatever? You know, I'm looking forward to hearing what the community think about car share allocations, the road space allocations, the heavy vehicles, the walking and cycling infrastructure, permitting, residential permitting, all these things that we hear about every single day, and how we're going to, you know, evolve that and make it so much better that, you know, people are happy. And I'm not, you know, I'm not thinking that people have issues with change, and it's going to take a while for them to, you know, settle into these things if they are changed. But I hope that it is long term and it works well. The document is very dense. I am pretty concerned about that. I think I made that clear in my questions. I really hope that the next step is easy to understand and for everyone to be able to participate as transparently as possible, and to be able to get in and find the question that they want to have a say on. So I encourage you to have a really good think about how we can maximise the number of people across the whole municipality to have their say in the best and easiest possible way. So thank you. Councillor Gross, would you like to close?
No, thank you.
Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? All those against? That motion's carried.
Division required.
Both Councillor Copsey and Councillor Simic requested a division. Do I need to say one person? I'll put that motion again. All those in favour? That's Councillor Baxter, Councillor Crawford, Councillor Gross, Councillor Voss, Councillor Simic, Councillor Brand, Councillor Copsey. All those against? Councillor Pearl. That motion's carried. Thank you. Councillors, I'm going to slightly rearrange the agenda. I'm going to hear 8.4 first. I just note there are some young children here that have been waiting very patiently already. So we're just moving one item. So we'll hear 1 Bay Street, Port Melbourne first. Today we had a planning forum in which we heard from the applicant, and there wasn't any objectors that actually turned up to have their say. So this was all discussed at the forum this afternoon. So there is no members of the public that have requested to speak to this item. Councillors, do you have any further questions of the officers? If not, we have an officer's recommendation or alternate. Councillor Crawford?
I would like to propose an alternative motion.
Can you please read that alternate recommendation?
Should I read the whole thing or just the highlighted parts, Madam Mayor?
Just the part that is changed, please, and then we'll see if we've got a seconder.
Okay, so the first part that will be changed is Part 1, Part A, the fin elements to the second floor addition to be set back a minimum of 2 metres from the site street frontages. Then D, under 1, is notations and illustrations clearly identifying the doors opening to the balcony at the first floor and the deck at the second floor are fitted with automatic closers and an airtight seal. And then the other alteration is under the balcony door details, and it's 16. It says the rooftop deck doors and the first floor balcony door must remain closed after 11 p.m. And again, it's the rooftop deck and first floor balcony doors must be fitted with automatic closers and airtight seals to the satisfaction of the responsible authority. The further changes to the hours of operation, which is 19. Without the further written consent of the responsible authority, the following restrictions apply, and we have deleted a whole number and replaced them with A, the external drink service bar must cease operation at 11 p.m. B, the outside balcony at first floor level and outdoor deck areas at second floor level must close Sunday to Thursday 12 midnight, Friday to Saturday 1 a.m. the following day, and the eve of and public holidays 1 a.m. the following day. And C, the internal floor area at second floor level must close at 1 a.m. And I believe that's the extent of it.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Brand. Councillor Crawford, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, please. So I've worked in hospitality for 25 plus years, so I understand the industry intimately. I also, one of the things about a vibrant, amazing city is our activity centres, and this is at the heart of our activity centres, and it is also at the forefront of the visage that we display to the world, our bayfront, our tourist vista. It has been a well-managed venue, the Pier Hotel, and both the building and the whole business, and that's exactly the kind of thing we want to encourage in our municipality. But over the last 15 years that I've worked in hospitality, particularly in Melbourne and in St Kilda, things have changed radically in the hospitality industry, and St Kilda, or the city of Port Phillip, is no longer the only hub of entertainment in this city. So, and there is also an oversupply of venues around the city. So there are, for businesses where once everyone just came here, there are so many pockets everywhere, and so it's about these businesses reinventing themselves and rethinking how they do business in order to remain successful. So I believe that this application does just that. It looks to the future. It looks to creating mind-blowing, views to the bay and beyond that will be hard to be reckoned with. So I think that in our responsibility as a council in these activity centres is to support the businesses, and they're looking forward to sustaining a great business in our area, which benefits the whole overall excitement and amenity of this city. I understand too that there were noise attenuants for the building built around it, which unfortunately that was the fault of the builder that did not come to be, but at all times this was the original building and it was built as a hotel to be a place of entertainment and people to come to. So I am asking you to support this alternative motion because, one, it supports a good local business, it supports our activity centres, and it acknowledges that in a tough time for hospitality venues, we need to support them in the little and big ways and not make it harder for them, not to handcuff them in their endeavours to continue on. So I ask you to support this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Crawford. Councillor Brand.
Yes, I'd just like to support those words from Councillor Crawford. This city enjoys along its foreshore some of the most brilliant views and brilliant environments which really belong to the whole of Melbourne and not just us lucky ones who are there. And so it's important that there are places there that that people can come and share the views and the ambience, and so this is certainly doing that. I just want to make a little note of what has happened with number 40, the surrounding neighbour, that it is actually it is actually, even though a lot of the objectives come from there to this objectives to this application, the previous history, as I understand it, is that number 40 was built quite a few years ago, and under the agent of change protocols that were set up by the state government at that point, that they, because they were arriving after the hotel was there, that they were actually, the onus was on them to soundproof their own building against the expectable noise from the hotel. And that has allowed the hotel to continue to thrive as a venue, and it has allowed the people at number 40 surrounding it to live with a degree of amenity that wouldn't have been there if the developer didn't have to comply to that. And the benefit of that is, again, here today, I think it is a good thing that this building has a roof deck. You know, I think it's something which needs to be shared as widely as possible. It's the place to view our view from, and my understanding is that the soundproofing requirements that were actually built into number 40 in that original agent of change arrangement are still seen as still adequate to deal with any further additional noise that might arise from this. And we're advised that is so, and I certainly hope that it is so, because if it is so, it is something which is allowing residential life and party life and commercial life all to happen in the same place.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Simic? Yep.
Just very briefly to say that this is obviously a development that's progressing in the Gateway area, something as Gateway Councillor, a business that I'm very proud of. So just wanted to thank the people who came today to present and speak to their application. We hope that you feel like we've listened to some of the things that you talked with us today about, and that the alternative recommendation did take some of those things into consideration. So congratulations on building such a successful business, and wish you best of luck into the future.
Thank you, Councillor Simic. Councillor Pearl?
I didn't attend the session this morning, but I did attend the consult that was done on this property, and there was legitimate concerns raised by the neighbours of the adjoining properties and some further down Bay Street, and they were legitimate concerns. But what impressed me most about the applicant is doesn't necessarily fee part of the application you've made, that they showed up, listened to the concerns. A lot of those concerns are already embedded into this application, which is pretty rare in terms of the short time I've been on council. It shows an applicant that's listened, responded, and in some cases, particularly with the soundproofing, gone above and beyond what would reasonably be expected of them. They should be commended for that, not to say that the residents in the adjoining properties don't have valid concerns, but most of those concerns were really caused by the planning errors and construction errors of the past. So happy to support this motion, and as with Councillor Simic, we wish you all the very best as we continue to watch your business grow.
Thank you, Councillor Pearl. Any other councillor like to speak? Councillor Crawford, would you like to close?
I do. I wanted to put on the record also that we note that the building has a 1373 section on it, 40 Beach Street as well, so that they are the responsible people for the audio. And there is a wall being built to attenuate that noise. And I also wanted to mention that the reason for the door change is, because I think it's very important, is Port Melbourne is a very windy place, and doors that are on swing ones are probably not always the most appropriate, and they bang very loudly themselves when the wind catches them. So I'm not sure that if it's a noise issue for residents, the doors would be far worse perhaps than the patrons. But anyway, I wanted to just thank you for your consideration, fellow councillors, as we look to support our vibrant and exciting city in the future, and I hope you will vote for this.
Thank you, Councillor Crawford. I will now put that motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Now we'll move to 8.3, 16 Dinsdale Street, Albert Park. Again, councillors, we had a forum today where we heard from members of the community and the applicant, so there are no members of the public that are requested that will be speaking today. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? Councillor Brand.
Yes, I have a question of procedure, of possible procedure, that maybe Mr Borg could answer.
Mr Borg.
I'm just caught in a bit of a bind on this, that I feel that there are three main issues that need to be attended to that warrant a changes to the application, and that would be, I guess, in very brief terms, heritage, parking and res code conformance. And although two of them I think can be solved by an approval with conditions, further conditions, I understand that the heritage one isn't, and I'm sort of wanting to move a refusal on one aspect but not on the others, and I can't see how they can be separated, and I just want to confirm that I'm not looking like I can do that.
Through you, Madam Mayor, no, that can't be done. You need to make one decision on the application.
So, Councillor Brand, moving one or the other, or the officer's recommendation. So any other questions of the officers, councillors? Councillor Brand, you got another question? Councillor Brand, you wish to move an alternative motion for 16 Dinsdale Street. Would you please read the changes, please, not the whole...
I'm actually going to move the alternative recommendation here for refusal. Should I read the whole thing?
Yes,
okay.
Councillor Brown, you need to read the whole thing. So you're moving a refusal.
Okay, recommendation, refusal 14.1, that the responsible authority, having caused the application to be advertised and having received and noted the objections, issue a notice of refusal. That a notice of refusal be issued for demolition of the existing building, removal of existing crossover, construction of 2 double-storey dwellings and reduction in car parking requirements at 16 Dinsdale Street, Albert Park. That 14.3, that the refusal be based on the following grounds. 1, the proposal would provide insufficient car parking. 2, the proposal would be contrary to the local policy framework in relation to the responsive design to site-responsive design and streetscape character, in particular clauses 21.05-1, 21.05-2 and 22.04 that would be out of character with the heritage streetscape. We've missed out one somewhere. Maybe we'll have to get the numbering right. The proposal would result in excessive impacts on the abutting properties, particularly through excessive bulk, mass and outlook from the neighbouring rear private open space areas.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. It is correct on the screen.
All right.
So do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Pearl to second. Councillor Brown, speak to your motion.
Okay. I want to speak about two things. I want to speak about the substance of why I think it should be refused, but also the circumstances in which I want to move this motion. I've actually spent some time this afternoon working on an alternative recommendation for approval with conditions on the other aspects, particularly on the res code compliance, which actually feeds into the parking compliance too. And I'm caught in this sort of dilemma that I do think that the problems, the deficiencies in this application proposal can be met on those two counts, on the parking and the res code compliances by conditions, maybe some alternative conditions. But I think on the heritage side of it, which is my particular interest, I can't in all conscience vote to approve it the way it is, because I just think it's the wrong heritage response to it, or an inadequate heritage response. I need to say, if my motion, the circumstances that we're in is that we are on a bit of a dilemma about refusal and the danger of it going to VCAT versus approving the application with conditions that might stand up and do the trick on most counts, and that's a real line ball for me about what to do about that. And I would say if my motion for refusal goes down, that I would foreshadow that I'd be happy to move or second another alternative motion for an alternative rec that applied new conditions. So that's the weird position I'm in. So that's for people to try and absorb about what to do strategically. But the reason why I have a problem with this, on the heritage grounds at least, is that I just don't think that the proposed design is an adequate response to the heritage streetscape. We started off with a different design first of all, which was, I think, an equally inappropriate response to the heritage streetscape, but a better piece of architecture. Now we've got a second version, which is an equally poor response to the streetscape, and actually a worse piece of architecture to boot. So I just don't think we're in a very good position with it. The argumentation for these two versions, the first and the second, which is now before us, the second, are both flawed, and they're arguments which have been put forward by our heritage advice and by the applicant's architects, and that is that contextual design, the contextual response to the design is that this building references 19th century building types. Gable roofs, terrace house sort of townhouses, and that should be, and the argument is that that's adequate for the street response, that it actually gives a nod, makes a reference to Victorian building typologies. The thing is that the context of this building, and it must be, we need good contextual design to respond to our heritage. The context of this building is not just a list of 19th century building types. It is, the context of this building is this particular street. And this particular street has very particular 19th century building types, which are almost universally in this part of the street, single story, double fronted, single story villas with a veranda along the front and a transverse ridge over the single story transfer ridge. which is quite, I don't know whether it's unique in the city, but it's certainly unusual in the city that you would have this particular typology, freestanding villas like this, single story. And I think this is what this new building is required to fit into. And what they have done is put two-story townhouse types with gable roofs, which in just about every sense is different in character from that shape. And I think they should have started off with finding a similar shape, like a double-story frontage, a double-width frontage, with a veranda across the front, and at least the beginning of a transverse ridged roof like the ones next to it, and then built onto that whatever they could to get a second story on. I think it's quite possible to get a second story on there without adversely affecting the heritage of the street. So on those grounds, I would refuse it on heritage grounds. That's where I stand on that, but I'll leave it up to everybody else's judgment of whether that's going to be the most strategically viable response.
Councillor Pearl.
We all understand we need more bedrooms in our municipality to accommodate the increased population that's expanding across our country and across our state and in our city, but not at the expense of our heritage landscapes, and particularly points 2 and 3 to this motion why I will be supporting, happy to second Councillor Brand's alternate motion.
Thank you, Councillor Pearl. Councillor Crawford.
Well, I'll speak to the first reason that I will be supporting this motion for refusal. So we've just sat here and talked about our integrated transport strategy and how business as usual will not cut it in order to retain the amenity of our city. And parking is the number one issue. So hard decisions have to get made. And so I feel like this is my first one here tonight. Maybe in the past, you know, we would have allowed waiver of a number of car spaces in streets, but as in Elwood, which is my ward, there are lots of streets that already are highly contested for parking spaces, especially near to a lot of the activity centres. So we haven't yet implemented the transformation around how we get around this city and where we park. And it's going to be probably a slow and the change over the next decade, and it will be hard and it won't be easy. But in the meantime, we've got to cater for what currently exists, and we can't always do what we did in the past. So these are a street where there's limited parking. We also have houses where at this point we as Australians are very wedded to having multiple cars per household, and if it's a 3-bedroom household, it is very unlikely that they will have just one car. So I will be refusing it because we cannot allow a 3-bedroom house to not have off-street parking to cater for the people that we live in that city, and they are not able to get permits. So all it does is make it more difficult for the local residents. I do agree also on heritage and excessive impact, but my key issue is the parking itself.
Thank you, Councillor Crawford. Would anyone else like to speak for or against? Councillor Brown, would you like to close?
I'm not sure whether I should be speaking on the other aspects of this of the application. I guess I would say that.
Point of order.
What is your claim?
Well, I was going to ask, I think you can only speak to your current motion.
Well, the current...
So, Councillor Brand, we've got a motion in front of us. You need to speak to that.
Yes, well...
You can speak to various...
Point of order, Madam Mayor. Do you get the right to close if there's been no speaker against?
You do. It's a choice.
Okay. Okay, let me just say briefly about the points that before I get on to the heritage one. The proposal would... The grounds of refusal are the proposal would provide insufficient car parking. I don't particularly... Just trying to think how to frame this. I'm very happy to have buildings which don't have the standard amount of car parking in a modern city now close to public transport. So I think that the parking isn't great, but it's a technical problem. But I don't. Anyway, I think it's a technical problem, but I don't think it's completely insurmountable. The proposal would be contrary, that's the heritage one, and the proposal would be excessive impact on abutting buildings. Well, I think it would, and I think that in principle, every part of the building that affects the neighbours should be compliant with res code, which it isn't, but there's lots of parts of the building which don't really impact it and don't need to be res code compliant. So I'm only agreeing with that statement, only putting that statement forward in very limited areas. But on the heritage front, you know, I think that there's a challenge here across the city on all heritage issues that when there's a street with something special about it, I think it's the responsibility, it's the challenge to any new application to jump in and say, this is terrific, this is exciting, I'm going to join in, I'm going to participate in that, I'm going to find something, a completely contemporary way to redo it, but I'm going to actually, you know, honour it, love it, participate in it and do it. I don't think that this one has adequately taken that attitude or achieved it. So there I am, wanting to refuse it on that ground.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. I will put that motion. All those in favour? All those against? That motion's failed. So would anyone like to move the officer's recommendation? Councillor Gross to move. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Crawford. Councillor Gross, would you like to speak to the officer's recommendation?
No, thank you.
Councillor Crawford, would you like to speak?
Hang on, no.
Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Brand? The officer's recommendation.
Oh, I see. I'm happy to take suggestions from him. I would like to foreshadow it if this one goes down.
Councillor Brand, you're unable to move another motion.
I can foreshadow that I would, can't I, at this stage?
No, you cannot move a second motion. Somebody else can.
All right, you have a go at that.
This one first.
All right.
So we're dealing with the officer's
I will move an alternate recommendation should the officer's recommendation fail.
Thank you, Councillor Copsey. We are dealing with the officer's recommendation at the moment. So we have a mover, Councillor Gross, a seconder, Councillor Crawford. Now we're calling for anyone to speak on this motion. Then, if we don't have any speakers on this motion, I will put that motion. All those in favour? All those against? That motion is also lost. Would anyone else have another motion? Councillor Copsey foreshadowed the officers, an alternate motion. Would you like to read the changes to the alternate motion?
Yes. So, the alternate motion is the officer's recommendation. However, in 1A, 1A is deleted and replaced with, is that correct? Yes, the setback of the uppermost level to increase by a minimum of 1.49 metres as measured from the rear boundary. A new condition at 1F reading Townhouse 2's bathroom and ensuite windows facing the courtyard comprising obscure glass and being non-openable to a minimum height of 1.7 metres above finished floor level. And then there is actually an additional addition to the paper version that has been circulated, and that is a new condition 1G, which is up on the screen. And it reads, the south-facing ensuite and north-facing bathroom walls of Townhouse 2 relocated an additional 250mm and 450mm respectively, so as to comply with standard 819, but it's B19, of Res Code, and in particular the 55-degree arc within that standard. I believe that's
Can
all
we
the
please have that
changes.
altered on the screen? Thank you.
Yep.
Do I have a seconder? Mr Chick, can I have some advice, please? Councillor Brand to second. Councillor Copsey, please speak to your motion.
All right. So thank you everybody who attended the planning forum today. What has been taken on board were some of the outstanding concerns around, in particular, overlooking of the bathroom window, which is what 1A proposes to deal with. That will, as discussed in the forum this morning, lead to the windows being opaque and only openable at the top, so removing the concern about overlooking of neighbouring number 18's living room window. That's 1F. 1A is a removal of a portion of the third bedroom at the rear of the townhouses. So this will bring the setback further in, 1.49 metres further in, and the effect of this will be that those rooms will no longer function as bedrooms, thereby reducing the car parking waiver that's required. And also, it's likely, though we didn't have shadow diagrams of alternate building masses, it's also likely to further decrease overshadowing on the rear of the properties and also on neighbouring properties. So that's both of those ones. And then at 1G, thank you very much, this is to bring the light well configuration into conformance with Res Code as viewed from the living room window of number 18. Thank you everybody for coming and speaking with us today and sharing your concerns. This will help to ameliorate some of those. It doesn't deal, as Councillor Brand has spoken about, the heritage concerns. I note that Council's Heritage Advisor did prefer the original version of the design that was put to Council, but we've had changes throughout the process where the applicant has taken on board feedback from objectors and incorporated that into their design. So I hope that some of that has gone some way to ameliorating concerns. And yeah, that's it for...
Thank you, Councillor Copsey. Councillor Brand.
Yes, I still think that it should be refused on the grounds of heritage. But given that it isn't, I don't think there is a lot wrong with the current proposal, aside from the street presentation of it. But I think there is sufficient wrong with it that needs alteration to it. One is, I think, the reduction of the number of bedrooms in each one is important in that it actually changes the category of the building from requiring 2 cars to 1 car, which means that I think that any parking dispensation from that then is not bad for the neighbourhood, and I think that since the people there can't park on the street because they won't have parking permits, I don't think that these new neighbours in these new townhouses are going to have a major impact on the local parking. In terms of the Res Code compliance, I think that every resident deserves, as a rule of thumb, as a starting point, that new neighbours comply with the Res Code requirements, setbacks, access to light, overlooking, etc., etc. But there are parts of in almost every single new development, there are parts of the development that do not affect their neighbours. For instance, when they're built next to walls on boundaries. They just don't affect their neighbours at all. And I think that what these new conditions that we've put on top of the conditions that were put on in the officer's original recommendation, actually mean that just about every part of the building now that affects its neighbours complies with res code. And, you know, in certain respects that's still going to be annoying to the neighbours, but I just think it's a fair way of doing it. So we've carved more bits off this building to the point that I'm sure that it wouldn't, any argument against it wouldn't stand up in VCAT, because it actually essentially complies with res code wherever it is affecting a neighbour. It's sort of a difficult. Well, anyway, that's the fairest point that I reckon we can reach here. That will stand up and not be appealed, and will work as best as possible for everyone. That's it.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Copsey, would you like to close? Or no? Yes, you would.
Sorry. There was just a matter I forgot. I'm thinking on my feet. Also, the deletion of a portion of the third bedroom should ameliorate bulk issues. And I note that there were some requirements that extra requirements that needed to be met in relation to environmentally sustainable design. There's a condition in the permit requiring the applicant to provide further information to the satisfaction of council in order to address those conditions. It is important in a growing city to support appropriate infill development where we can, and it is possible to live in Albert Park car-free. It's only 250 metres to the nearest tram, and I know that because I live not far from here without a car, and it's the kind of it may seem perverse, but providing accommodation that doesn't have car spaces and has no right to on-street spaces does force people to contemplate life without a car, and having done that, I can affirm that it's possible. So there is good grounds in terms of reducing congestion for actually supporting car-free development, noting that there is, on the applicant's view, occasional provision for access to the rear of these properties. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Copsey. I will now put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried. All those against? That's carried. Thank you very much. Right. All right, we'll move now to the annual report, 8.5. So we've got the annual report for 2016-2017. Again, we have no members of the public that have requested to speak. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? If not, we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for that? Councillor Baxter. Councillor Pearl to second. Councillor Baxter, would you like to speak?
Yes. Look, very briefly, it's a very, very long and detailed report, and I believe we've won awards in the past for the putting together and presentation of our reports. So it's very, very lovely. I'm not entirely sure how many people are going to read it cover to cover. I think most people are just going to find what they are looking for, but it's pretty great. So happy to commend it.
Councillor Pearl. Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Copsey?
Hopefully at least 9 people have read it cover to cover, if not more. Just to thank the officers and the CEO for the immense amount of work that goes into producing this document. I know that the City of Port Phillip's reports are considered to be of a really, really high standard in the local government sphere. There is a wealth of information in here for those keen citizens who would like to know more about Council's operations, and we do our very best to be transparent about our expenditure and our programs. So have at it, enjoy the annual report. I certainly did.
Thank you, Councillor Copsey. Would anyone else like to speak? before we close, I'd just like to say just that this is for the final year of the past council from 2013 to 2017, and just want to note that almost 100% of the actions were completed. During this last term, this new council was elected, and during that very early days we went off-site, got to know each other a little better, and it was the first phase of downloading for our council plan. It was an incredibly important time, and it was during that time where all of our ideas sort of got down on paper, and that's what we've been spending a good deal of the last 6 months doing, is developing up that council plan. So, that's where we've got to today. The year in review, well, it's been a really busy year. We've delivered things like Ackland Street, we've delivered the St Kilda Lifesaving Club, the Palais Theatre was a massive project, and that was also completed. Gasworks Theatre was a terrific event. We've advocated as well for our city. We've been successful with the Pride Centre. We've got integrated facilities in the new Farrar Street School. We've purchased 2 to 4 Buckhurst Street, which is going to be the new park in Fisherman's Bend. And ongoing and consistently, we have continued to advocate for the early delivery of catalytic tram infrastructure into our mixed-use City of Port Phillip municipality in Fisherman's Bend. So we have really concentrated on continuing to provide services that matter to our community. We welcomed our new CEO. We said goodbye to our old CEO. We now have a 10-year focus going forward, which is really providing a lot of directions. We have an incredibly ambitious agenda. We have some really fantastic transformations that we want to see in the next little while. But mostly we've got a lot of hard work ahead of us, and we've got a lot to deliver. The annual report is visually beautiful, and I actually really love reading this report every single year. I love seeing all the services, the statistics, and how many childcare centres and how many children are going to our childcare centres, for example. It provides an absolute wealth of information. So I'd like to congratulate the organisation for putting this together and all the hard work that they've done, and recommend this to the councillors for endorsement. So, Councillor Baxter, would you like to close?
No, I sort of kept mine short and sweet so that the Mayor can talk about it.
Thank you. Then I'll put that. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you very much. We'll move now to the new lease for Kiosk 2, 6 Jacka Boulevard, St Kilda. We don't have any members of the public that have requested to speak. Then, do you have any questions of the officers? Councillor Crawford.
So my question is, in the criteria that we're looking at for deciding who would be the successful lessee, I noticed that 50% is price, but there are various other categories around the managerial, technical and financial capacity and prior operational and business experience. Now, I understand they aren't the major weighting, but the difference between the two, the successful lessee and the other submitter, are so different. Usually when these things come before us, there's only a short, like one person might get 20 and the other might get 15, but there just seems to be such a large discrepancy. So I guess I was just trying to understand, is there any areas of concern? What is broken down in that, particularly number 2, the managerial, technical and financial capacity, that one would be double the score of the other? Is it that they're new, or what is the thinking behind it, please?
Through you, Madam Mayor, the difference is that one did have substantially more experience and expertise in the area, but that the one that is being proposed does have adequate experience and expertise in the area. So whilst one did have significantly more, the weightings still, through having the price being 50%, did mean that the one that had less experience and expertise did get put forward as the preferred. However, that they are considered to have adequate in all of those areas.
Councillor Pearl.
We don't apply the same criteria as here as to a number of other leased properties for obvious reasons, because they have community groups or charity groups to it. So this criteria can be, in some cases, a bit of a blunt instrument. But just to be clear, you have the ability to, regardless of the criteria, make an alternate recommendation if you think that the vendor is better regardless of price. Is that correct, or do you have to follow the letter of the law according to who got the best result as per the score, or you still have the flexibility, I assume, to make a recommendation otherwise compared to the score?
Councillor Pearl, is that the officer's recommendation or council officers?
Through you, Madam Mayor, this is a standard procurement process that we're going through, so we needed to set the criteria for assessment ahead of the assessment being undertaken, and we needed to then comply with that assessment. And so we don't see any reason for varying that assessment, which would basically mean abandoning this procurement process and starting again. We can't really change the way we assess them midway through the process.
Thank you, Ms O'Neill. So what are the options available to us? It's to accept the recommendation or disband in the process. It's not to change the recommendation. Are you able to outline the process available to us, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. What we're proposing tonight is to commence the statutory procedures for a lease. So we've actually gone through a procurement situation and identified a preferred tenant. So the options are to either commence the statutory procedures for the lease under the sort of general terms that we've outlined in the report, or to not commence the statutory procedures.
Thank you. Councillor Crawford?
I guess I'm just looking for assurance that it is just about a newer person perhaps taking on the leasing and not any other areas of concern, because one of the criteria, it does say fulfil all contractual obligations, and one is double the other. It does, or within that too. I know I'm getting stuck on it, but within that 15%, was the managerial, technical and financial capacity all separate, or was it considered together? I just want assurance before we make a decision, please.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the proponent that we're recommending was considered to be compliant and capable of conducting the business that we're proposing that they undertake. So even though in some aspects the other scored much more highly, we still consider that this one has the capacity to undertake the business as per a lease.
Thank you. Any more questions, councillors? If not, we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for that or something different? Councillor Gross to move, Councillor Copsey to second. Councillor Gross, would you like to speak to your motion?
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Look, I completely understand that the discrepancy in the points might be off-putting. All I'm going on, though, is that we've been assured that whilst the successful applicant has less experience, it is sufficient. And I'm happy to accept that reassurance, and I'm happy to have a price weighting of 50%, and I'm happy to accordingly accept the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Gross. Councillor Copsey? Would anyone else like to speak? I don't suppose you want a second go, Councillor Gross. Will I put that motion?
I'm happy to talk for hour after hour.
So then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. So move to 8.7, which is the proposed sale of residential property. Now, we don't have any members of the public that have requested to speak, but I did want to outline before we take questions. take questions from the councillors. There is another alternate recommendations from the officers. It's on the screen and it's to cover our legal requirements, so it's a slight adjustment. So if we can get that up, please. So 1.2 is an addition, directs that the public notice of an intention to sell be given under section 223 of the Act, and 1.3, which authorises the Chief Executive Officer or delegate to undertake the administrative procedures necessary to enable Council to carry out its functions under section 223 of the Act. The rest has been advertised. Just wanted to clarify, can you explain why the changes were necessary, please?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Basically, this is an oversight. This is two conditions to cover the situation where, under the Local Government Act, the council has powers and functions, things that can't be undertaken by officers without a resolution of the council.
Thank you very much. Any questions, councillors, of the officers? Councillor Baxter?
Sorry, I could see Councillor Copsey's hand up, but basically, just to get some assurance that, because I hate the thought of selling off public assets unless there is literally no value we could get out of it. So, could you please just walk me through some of the things that you explored in terms of what we could possibly do with it, and how you got to the conclusion that actually the best value to the city would be to sell the asset?
Through you, Madam Mayor, the site that we're proposing for sale is very limited in our ability to utilise it in its current condition, and we have no ability to redevelop it because it is heritage listed. So it was originally purchased for the intention of demolishing a row of the houses all in a row for car parking. That is now impossible under heritage restrictions that were put in place after that purchase, and even for things like social housing, it's not designed that it would be efficient for that purpose, and so therefore it's thought that it's better to sell that and utilise the funds from that sale for other to support other land sales for more appropriate uses.
I'd just like to ask... Oh, Councillor Copsey, you had your hand up before.
That was literally the question I was going to ask.
I'd also like to ask a question about... So this was proposed before. It came up as a recommendation for a sale in the past, and it was pulled, if you like, from the process because it had a tenant in there that had been promised long-term access to this particular property. That tenant has now vacated. What's been the circumstances surrounding that?
Through you, Madam Mayor. Oh, thank you, Madam Mayor. The tenant decided to move of their own volition after we'd stopped the sale previously, and so they've now moved on.
Thank you. Any other questions, councillors? Then we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for that? Councillor Pearl to move. Councillor Baxter to second. Councillor Pearl, would you like to speak? Councillor Baxter? Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Brand?
I just think this is actually quite a good news story, and it's a tiny story that's gone over a long time. It stretches back to the era of the, I guess, the 1970s, when our policy, the council's policies were to demolish, rows and rows of houses for car parking behind shops, and we lost a lot of really charming, beautiful places and streets through that. But luckily, that didn't happen, and now we have in extremely good locations behind shops, small heritage protected houses that can't be turned into mansions, that will provide relatively affordable housing for people who who want to live in small houses. They're obviously valued, so they're not dirt cheap, but they are small at least, and they're protected, and they are part of the beautiful thing of our city. And I just think it's a good little story that the protests of the 70s have achieved something now in the 2010s come to fruition.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Does anyone else want to speak? If not, I will put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried. All those against? That's carried. Thank you. We'll move to item 8.8, which is the quarterly review of financial performance and consideration of unbudgeted initiatives. Again, we don't have anyone that's requested to speak. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? Councillor Pearl.
Just on the $200,000 for the Fisherman's Bend precinct, it says in the report, I think 9 months. I haven't got the report in front of me. We're hiring contractors for a period of 9 months to backfill existing positions. In a question and a briefing, I was given 7 months. My question is the correct amount of time that we're hiring contractors for to backfill positions temporarily for 9 months or 7 months? And also, is that 9 or 7 month time period sufficient to complete the work required? And will there be more ongoing cost to the city after that period?
Mr Dewar.
Through you, Madam Mayor. I think in conversation with Councillor Pearl, I did mention the period of 7 months, given that we're actually 2/3 of the way through October, and all things being equal, getting somebody on board sort of through November, December, it was likely that it would be a 7-month engagement. As far as we're aware, the task force anticipates that the precinct planning will be complete by the middle of next year. As we know, with the task force's other documents, they have all extended out, and therefore it's very difficult to forecast when that work will actually be finished. But at this point, we're taking them at their word and presume that the substantive work for those precinct plans will be complete by the middle of next year. Over the next couple of months, while we prepare for the budget for the following financial year, we can reassess that, and if we believe that there were to be an extension by the task force for that precinct planning, we could put in a bid as part of the usual budget process.
Thank you, Mr Dewar. I've also got a question. It's on Brooks Jetty. Just clarity, please. In some of the elaborated commentary, it says the proposal to prepare a funding deed with the Bring Back Brooks Jetty Community Group to the value of $7,500. Just that could be that it's going to cost that much to prepare the funding deed, or that's what the funding deed is the value of. I assume it's the second part of that question.
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, that's correct. It's the second part. So the funding deed is set for $7,500 to the Save Brooks Jetty Group for them to undertake the work as per the letter that your correspondence to them, which was to prepare a proposal to engage with the community about the future of Brooks Jetty.
Thank you. And this is not something that was unforeseen. This was discussed and agreed before the council plan was developed. So how come we're only seeing this now?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I can only state that must have been an oversight in the budget finalisation process.
Thank you. Councillor Crawford.
I'm not sure if I was just half listening. So is it not, I didn't think it was to consult with the community. I thought it was to come up with a design plan and that they had to match the funding, so not the entire amount, and that it was contingent on them matching it before they would receive. Am I incorrect on that?
That's the only thing I have.
Yes, that's what I said. Why have they matched it before we agreed to give it to them? That was really clear at the time that they wouldn't receive it unless they matched it.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'm afraid I don't have the correspondence in front of me, but from memory, that it was asking them to put a proposal, and part of that proposal was to outline their partners and how they would raise additional money. So the 7,500 wasn't contingent on them matching it initially. It was they needed to demonstrate how they were going to bring in partners. And
so I guess my next question is, if I'm not willing to support that particular part to this, is there a way of excluding it or not? Because that's not my understanding of what we agreed to, so I'm not willing to fund that. Me personally, I don't know if anyone else agrees with me, so I'm not sure where the process is. I would, until they have matched it, I'm not...
Councillor Crawford, that could be a alt. Mm-hmm. Are there any other questions, councillors? Then we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for that or something different? Councillor Copsey, to move the officer's recommendation. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Gross. Councillor Copsey, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, as part of our ongoing disclosure around our spending in council and further to the transparency in the preparation of the actual annual budget, we fully disclose these unbudgeted items. I guess I just wanted to remark that it's not unusual for items to come up during the course of the year. There are events that occur that mean that we have to spend money, and there are things that need to be responded to, but there are also expenditure that results from, for example, councillor initiatives that we support, and councillors are familiar and have full background on all of the items in the unbudgeted items list. In particular, there's some in here that we're very proud to agree to, such as our support for the community during the unnecessary postal plebiscite campaign, and also the In Our Backyard task force, which was established in order to respond to the closure of the Gatwick, which happened very early on in our term, and that's an ongoing task that we are seeking to secure replacement beds in our municipality for people at risk of homelessness. So I guess I just wanted to reinforce that these items come up and we take seriously at the time, considering the extra expenditure, and tonight consider whether we accept the discretionary items.
Thank you, Councillor Copsey. Councillor Gross, would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Baxter.
Yes, look, basically, I guess I'm kind of reiterating some of the things that Councillor Copsey said, but basically this is a mixture of the fact that things come at you thick and fast when you're on council, and you do have to sort of duck and weave and do what you need to do, and certainly things like the In Our Backyard task force, as was mentioned, these sorts of things come up and we've just got to deal with them. Also, I just want to note some of these things will hopefully, they're more about bringing forward expenditure rather than just brand new expenditure, so hopefully that actually takes a little bit of pressure off of the next year and the following years after that. I think that overall I'm still very pleased with the position that we're in, but I just want to note that going forward we want to use rigour and make sure that we're using the community's money as best as possible. And I do think that there are things like us lighting up the town hall, I think, was absolutely fantastic, and all I've heard is positive response to that, and people saying how beautiful it is and can we have it forever. Unfortunately, maybe not forever, but it is fantastic, and so many people gave that sort of feedback, and so those are the sorts of things that that it's good to get that feedback on. But yeah, this is probably going to happen again, perhaps not to this extent or whatever, but we've certainly got to do what we can to make sure we're reconciling our numbers regularly, and that's what this is all about.
Thank you, Councillor Baxter. Anybody else wishing to speak? Councillor Pearl.
The $7,500 represents a bit of a dangerous precedent. So I'm on the Grants Committee, which we spend hours reviewing proposals provided to us, and then those proposals are assessed according to defined criteria, and then they have to provide review reports to us, etc. and I'm a little concerned that the $7,500, albeit quite small, that we've given out, doesn't have anywhere near the same amount of rigour, and it appears that this money, albeit small, isn't backed by any form of council resolution or clear directions to officers about how that money should be provided, whether or not that money should be provided to an incorporated entity, what the purpose of that money specifically is for, and what the terms of that money are for. And that's not good decision making. It's the smallest amount on here, but I don't feel comfortable supporting that one item, which is 1.2.3.
Thank you, Councillor Pearl. Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Copsey, would you like to close? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? All those against? That's carried.
Division required.
Councillor Copsey has called for a division, so I'll ask that question again. All those in favour? That's Councillor Copsey, Councillor Brand, Councillor Simic, Councillor Voss, Councillor Gross, Councillor Baxter. All those against? Councillor Pearl and Councillor Crawford. That motion is carried. Thank you. Now we'll move through to the review of council delegations to special committees of council. Again, no members of the public have requested to speak. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? No, there are none. Then we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for that? Councillor Copsey to move, Councillor Gross to second. Councillor Copsey, would you like to speak to the motion? Councillor Gross, would anybody else? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? All those against? That's carried. We'll move to item 8.10, which is Assembly of Councillors. Councillor Gross to move, Councillor Pearl to second. Would you like to speak?
The Dream Team.
Would anyone like to speak to the motion? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Then we'll move to item 9, which is notices of motion. There are none. Item 10, which is reports by council delegates. Councillors, do you have any reports to make? Councillor Baxter.
Just one brief one. I actually spoke at our last council meeting about how the Association of Bayside Municipalities was preparing a position paper on advocating for the ban of plastic bags across Victoria. I'm happy to report that apparently the power of the ABM is so strong that state governments quiver at the thought of us putting out such a position paper, because we didn't even get it out yet, and the state government has made an announcement with regards to plastic bags that is absolutely to be welcomed, and it's in line with a motion that this council passed a few months back. Still waiting to get some more details from the state government, but the ABM are very pleased, and I imagine this council probably is as well.
Thank you, Councillor Baxter. Would anyone else like to report? Councillor Brand.
I just want to make another little report on my delegateship. Delegacy. Living, delicacy. To the Linden New Arts board, which I went to a board meeting on Monday night, and I guess one of the nice bits of the things that we considered last night was the CEO, Melinda Martin, has just arrived back from overseas, having been on a study trip for a week or two, courtesy of the, I've forgotten which foundation it was, but a very, very highly prestigious one that paid for her trip and came back with just an amazing set of experiences and research for the way that a small gallery like Linden can make a big impact publicly. She specifically went to London and checked out all of the similar-sized organisations and all of the things that they did for fundraising, the way that they organised themselves for exhibitions, and it's a fantastic study trip that she's done, and set up potential partnerships with them which would not be available without that sort of personal thing, and there'll be announcements coming up as they get sorted out, but adding a lot of value. So that was great.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Anybody else? Councillor Simic.
Madam Mayor, I'd just like to report that the Port Phillip Housing Association AGM is coming up on Thursday, 23rd of November, and there's a few directors who are up for renominating or the opportunity for other directors to be picked. It will be a great event where some of the successes of the organisation, which keeps going from strength to strength, will be celebrated. I'd also like to point out that the Port Phillip Housing Association's made a statement during the marriage equality postal vote taking place in support of marriage equality, something that I'm very proud of and something that's important to people who live in accommodation provided by Port Phillip Housing Association, an issue that's important within our diverse community. The South Melbourne Market Management Committee met last night as well. We've had the annual report presented to us today, so I think councillors are well aware of the incredible work and that the South Melbourne Markets is doing, and again going from strength to strength. And lastly, the Multicultural Forum met several weeks ago, had several presentations from different service providers and talked about how we can do more to recognise multiculturalism within our community. I was invited to some of their lunches, which is something I look forward to attending. So quite a bit going on within our municipality, obviously.
Great job. Thank you, Councillor Simic. Anybody else? Thank you for those. So we'll move to item 11, which is urgent business. Councillors, is there any urgent business? There are none. Item 12, which is confidential items, and councillors, we have no confidential items tonight. So there being no further business, I declare the meeting closed. Thank you.